Today is the third research seminar of our semester so far, and it's my pleasure to see Anna, finally to meet Anna after a lot of communication we've had back and forth. It's a shame that we don't have you here at IRES and we can't all be in the same room, but it is certainly great that we can have an audience and we can get a chance to engage with your work today. Anna Tarasenko is based at the moment in Helsinki at the Aleksanteri Institute as a postdoc, and also she is a research fellow at the Center of Comparative Governance Studies at the Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg. Her main research interest is the development and evolution of the non-profit sector in Russia, which we all know has changed quite a lot and has seen an enormous amount of state involvement and reform and change in laws. So it's a very dynamic topic. Her particular focus is the transformation of the Russian welfare state and social policy, and the increasing use of non-profits to deliver welfare services in different and new ways, which are not always captured when we have all of our focus on NGOs that are involved in politics or political reform. So at the moment, Anna has just finished, or is still working, yes, just finished a project on the de-institutionalization of child welfare in Russia and the role of non-profit organizations in childcare for those left without parental care. And I'm glad to also say that Anna has co-edited a book that's coming out very soon, entitled Reforming Child Welfare in the Post-Soviet Space, publication at Routledge. So I now pass it to you, Anna, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to give this talk, and I will demonstrate presentation in a second. Just to understand the rules. So I have about 20-30 minutes to talk, right? So, and the findings that I'm going to present are just a part of the bigger research. And it is in progress. And I will be happy for any questions, contributions, or I don't know, critics, of course, as well. So just let me start. So can you see the screen properly? I hope.
Yes, perfect.
Good. Okay. So this is actually the title and the main idea of the research that I'm conducting at the moment, and I'm studying both non-profit organizations and also small business or private companies that now involved in social service delivery in Russia. And I'm asking and trying to understand the contribution in these two phenomena, blame shifting, cost shifting, or cooptation. And actually all these three directions, they are discussed in academic literature. And scholars actually try to understand whether we are dealing with blame shifting, that actually the state would like to shift this blame on private companies and non-profits in service delivery, or maybe we are witnessing this cost shifting phenomenon, or maybe even cooptation. So one of the issues that I raise is that what kind of phenomenon are behind this outsourcing project of social services in Russian Federation. And today I will focus on this cost shifting because actually it is indeed a big project and a lot of information involved there. So just to be more focused today, I decided to just demonstrate one part of findings that I actually managed to gather and would like to share with you. So when we are talking about the outsourcing in Russia, we definitely need to take a look at Russian regions, because this is where actually this reform of social service provision is happening, even though that the reform itself was launched at the federal level, and actually central government was behind the this federal law that was the crucial for making these changes. And looking at these regions, I'm actually asking if we can find any explanations of the scope and particularity of outsourcing activity in Russian regions. So I think I am focusing both on regional cases, trying to explain them, and also on the specific cases of outsourcing, in order to kind of have these two dimensions. When we are talking about this outsourcing reform, it was launched actually, the law was introduced in 2013, as you see, but it came into action in 2015. So we have around 5 years of this reform implemented. And just would like to mention 3 main things that were crucial for pushing this outsourcing in Russian regions. So this federal law implies that the monopoly of public welfare system is diminished, and actually private companies and non-profit organizations are invited to provide services and have the reimbursement from the budget. Important thing here is that those services that outsourced, they are the same services as public providers deliver, actually. So these private companies, they of course can, private or non-profits can deliver other types of services, but this reimbursement is only working for those that are provided by public organizations. So we can see that government is not interested in diversification of services itself, but helping the public system to cope with those social demands that appear, and in those places where actually public sector cannot cope with that societal demand. Important dimension of that federal law also deals with the role of citizens, because citizens are now considered as clients. This is also something that we can find in other contexts, not only in Russia. So citizens actually can choose among providers. They can also go and take some services in public organizations, but also in private companies. And under this law, if the services are provided within this law, within this outsourcing scheme, actually those non-state providers will be reimbursed for those services that were delivered. So these are the key principles of that law. And actually, empirically, I'm focusing on the implementation of this law. We can talk a little bit later about different kind of outsourcing and different outsourcing scheme that exist in Russia, but I think this is now a bit out of the logic of this paper. So some findings and some big picture, first of all. So it is indeed very time-consuming work to calculate how many providers actually operate within this new scheme of outsourcing. And I started to calculate them for 1 year, 2017. So I plan to do this once more in order to see the dynamic in different years, but now I represent the results from 2017. You see, if we take a look at 70 Russian regions, there is some diversification of providers. You see that around 10% of all providers are actually non-state providers. And monopoly of public providers do not exist anymore in Russia, also thanks to this law. I must mention that these providers working with several groups of people, of customers, of citizens. So first of all, of course, we will focus on elderly people and disabled. This is one category. Another category that is covered by this outsourcing scheme is children that are left without parental care and families in a risk of losing their parental rights. Third category where this outsourcing scheme covers is homeless people, and also people that have some need in rehabilitation. So different categories of people. Let's just take a look at one category of providers that are working with elderly. So I actually calculated number of private companies and non-profits that are actually delivering services to elderly people, and you see that this scope of providers is not very big in comparison to others, probably. And you see that in 29 Russian regions, no private providers are registered and operate in this sphere of elderly care. So let's move further, and just would like to demonstrate some other data, just to give you an idea about the scope of organizations and a bit of the context. Of course, the first expectation would be when we are studying and trying to understand when and what regional conditions would favor the registration of private and non-profit organizations in order to deal with this social services for elderly, would be the population. I mean the aging of the population. You can see in the last column, I actually give some idea of how many citizens, or in percentage, the population that comes to the category older than employable age. So, and 25% of all population in each region is the median for this data. And you see right away that Moscow and St. Petersburg are kind of leaders here, because we know that, and from other literature, that actually those people who live in urbanized areas in such big cities as Moscow and St. Petersburg, they possess, I mean, better quality of life, maybe higher education, and also better wealth. And in the end, the number of elderly in those regions are higher. But as you see, actually, it does not contribute directly to the number of those organizations that registered as public providers. I just would like to clarify a little bit this case of Moscow and St. Petersburg. As you see, for Vladimirskaya Oblast and Leningradskaya Oblast, this Moscow and St. Petersburg are neighboring regions, and that's why they are mentioned here. And this is crucial not only for cities themselves, these big cities as Moscow and St. Petersburg, but also for neighboring regions. So that was my idea why I actually paying attention to that. So generally speaking, we also see that in some regions like Respublika Yakutia, so many providers are actually registered, 12 private providers as we see, but the percentage of elderly population is not very high. So we can see different pictures here in different Russian regions. And also just would like to remind you that about half of those regions that are studied don't have any private or non-profit providers of social services for the elderly in their registers, in their welfare systems. So I would like to demonstrate some results of this regional level of comparison that I tried to conduct in order to reveal those contexts, those factors that could impact the regional differences in registering more private and non-profit providers or not registering them at all. And you see that this chart demonstrates the correlation between number of private companies and urban districts in each region. So the index of correlation is not very high, but still rather relevant, as you see, and some cases are placed on that, are seen here on the screen. So you see that St. Petersburg is a bit of outlier here. So this is actually because of the system of municipalities is different in St. Petersburg compared with other regions. So definitely St. Petersburg is one of those regions where the urbanization is rather high. So probably I will try to look for other measurement for this urbanization. But what we can see from here is that rather obvious conclusion that actually the more urbanized the area is, the more we would expect that more private companies would be registered as providers of social services for elderly. And going a bit deeper into this explanation, I think I will need more data, of course, here, but I would like to mention that two things are important. First of all, of course, the values of those people who live in urbanized areas are different compared to rural areas, and those living in urbanized cities, for example, and areas, they would be more interested in high quality services for their relatives, elderly relatives. So this is one way of interpreting this. Another way, of course, deals with their resources and private companies themselves. So if these urbanized area are wealthier than rural area, as we can expect, actually more private companies would be registered, would operate in those regions, and we would expect them to be a part of this outsourcing scheme. So these two ways or directions of explanation could be developed here further. So I'm actually going closer to the second and final stage of this analysis with some results that directly speak to this explanation of dealing with the cost shifting. So this is also something interesting and important that I have found by now, digging into this analysis and trying to explain regional differences. So what I found is this rather high correlation between number of registered private companies and percentage of workers that are employed in mixed forms of ownerships, generally in each region, in a given region. So it was actually interesting to see that, but at the same time, it speaks, I mean, these results speak to the very specific explanation of why and how actually, we can understand the process of outsourcing and emergence of those new private and non-profit organizations to be a part of this service delivery system. So let me give you examples. Maybe I need to say just something here. Okay, so looking at examples will be more understandable here. So I have found out that actually what this mixed employment means and how we can make a sense out of that, we need to take a look, of course, on the particularities of those private companies and non-profits that are registered. So what is so peculiar about them? I have found out many cases of organizations, private companies that registered as private companies, as individual entrepreneurs, as you see here, But at the same time, those managers of these individual entrepreneurs, they also combine position in public sector. This is one case, the first case of Arkhangelskaya Oblast. You see that this Danichenko Yulia Alexandrovna, who is the head of this individual entrepreneurship, this private company registered as a social provider of services for elderly. She also actually occupies the position of the head of public agency of social services for elderly and disabled. So this is one case. Another typical case, the second one with individual entrepreneur, Lydia Ляпушкина, who actually has been the deputy of the 5th Council of Deputies in municipal district in Arkhangelskaya Oblast. So you see that those organizations that are private companies that are registered, that definitely affiliated with public organizations, or managers of these private companies, they are embedded into political or executive system of a given region. Here you can see examples of other regions like Murmanskaya Oblast, Leningradskaya Oblast, and some others that experience or have this kind of peculiar private companies that actually registered as private, meaning that they are independent, of course, in terms of resources and ownership, but we see very close connections with public sector through their managers. And actually not only through their managers, but in some companies, private companies, at their web pages, you can definitely see more intervention from the public sector, meaning that those social workers that are employed in private companies, they combine their positions in public sector companies as well, public sector organizations. So this kind of double employment is something that can explain this correlation that appeared. I demonstrated on the previous slide. So from here, actually, there are so many interesting questions can be found and actually require explanation. But let me actually just stop here, and maybe we can discuss more rather than kind of listen to my explanation and my interpretation of that, though I would be interested in, of course, digging into that, those findings. So what we can conclude from here is that we definitely see this cost shifting paradigm behind the outsourcing. And this cost shifting comes in two directions. First of all, of course, public sector, when employed people start operating in not only public sector organization, but also in private organizations, their workload is reduced. And actually what state is doing, or welfare bureaucracies in those regions, they are actually trying to cut costs on the expense of those social workers that were previously, or they continue being employed at the public organizations. They now also partly employed in private organizations, and actually the cost of this workload is less, also due to the absence of social package, for example. This is the one direction of cost cutting. Another one is that actually some costs now placed on shoulders of those customers that are actually involved into this outsourcing scheme, and because they have to pay for additional services now. If public sector providers, of course, they can only deliver those services that are in the minimum package of social provision that is identified by law. When it comes to private companies, of course, there are so many opportunities for diversifying services and just charge fees for that kind of services. So customers are also paying more. in this scheme. Second conclusion would be that actually in the end, as a result, families whose relatives are involved into these outsourcing schemes, meaning that they have these services delivered, they of course undertake more responsibility in terms of the money, first of all. We also see the blurring boundaries between public and private sector as a result of this combination of affiliations, both managers and social workers employed in public and private sector, and probably many other things. So those questions that I would like to discuss here, and would be actually happy to see your reflection or maybe vision on that, and on findings as well. So how actually these this kind of schemes of combined affiliation, how they impact the activity of those managers and employed in public and private sectors simultaneously. So does it make any difference for those people who actually combine these positions in private and public providers? So what is going on there? Second question would be, from my point of view, important to understand actually how this practice is different from democratic regimes and democratic countries, because I have found the literature that demonstrates the same cost-shifting strategies in other contexts and democratic contexts as well. So it is interesting to maybe dig further into the empirics to understand this difference, if there is any difference. Also, two final questions relate to the political regime, because we cannot of course, escape talking and thinking about the implications for the political regime dynamic, because we know that budgetniki, those people who are employed in public sector, they are the key electorate for the current political regime in Russia. And Ekaterina Schulman will be probably talking a little bit next week about this over your seminar. And what is going on with this electorate when they are losing those social workers and managers in public sector? They are losing their positions. They are losing also income in a way. So what is happening there? And maybe final question that is dealing with the important direction of the discussion, if we can witness any cooptation, because it seems that many scholars actually pay a lot of attention to this cooptation strategy. So can we see any cooptation through outsourcing? That would be also another important issue to raise, I think. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I would be happy for any questions and further comments on that. Thank you.
Many thanks, Anna, for a fascinating presentation. And we have a lot of time to unpack some of the points that came up today, and also to go to the other points that you brought up in the first slide on the other aspects of the research and in the interpretation of what is going on with these reforms and what is behind them, what is behind the rationale behind them. Today, I'm happy to connect anyone who wants to come in and ask their question or say their question on video. Otherwise, you could write the question on the chat and I will read it out, but preferably with your affiliation and full name if it's not visible on your Zoom ID. But to get things started, I would like to ask about perhaps the neoliberal philosophy behind this idea of cost shifting. I'm probably more familiar with it in the UK context with Thatcherism and how this idea became extremely dominant or hegemonic to the point that it's no longer even questioned in a lot of aspects. So I'm curious, what's your view on the implementation of this neoliberal philosophy in a more, I don't like to say, well, an increasingly authoritarian environment, perhaps, shall we say, in Russia, or if you prefer the term hybrid system, maybe some of the specifics on how it's being implemented. And just to add a little bit to the question, how people themselves on the lower level, how do you think they understand this, this process, and how familiar are they with the word neoliberal? They might probably use a different term to describe these reforms. Perhaps they don't call them liberal reforms.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So shall I just reflect a little bit? It is important, actually, thanks a lot. It is a very important question about this neoliberal idea working under this non-democratic settings. As far as I understand, many scholars actually really see these reforms, social policy reforms in Russia within this context, and emphasizing the kind of bad side of this neoliberalism, especially when it comes to this cost reduction. So it seems that in the end, even if the idea is maybe good idea to make the public sector working more effectively, in the end, the main outcome would be the reduction of costs and reduction of the withdrawal of the state from the previous obligation. So this is something that definitely is going on, and especially in these kind of reforms. But you also see that, of course, there are so many particularities, especially when we are talking non-profits and private companies. Of course, they are different. I mean, in nature of operation, they are different. So here, just so many things that we can discuss. If I can just leave it for a while and just maybe come back to that at some other point, but also would like to say a couple of words about people. People definitely see this reduction in state's presence in their life, in their well-being. And actually, pension reform was one of the critical points when people openly decided not to support this policy anymore, voting against United Russia. So it was really one of those expressions of their dissatisfaction with the direction of the policy. So it is interesting to see how in other way people would express their understanding of what's going on in their attitudes. But they definitely, they are not fine with this policy. Just one more thing that I would like to add. When we are talking about these elderly people, usually they have families, so families would experience these new costs that they have to bear in care for their relatives. But when we are talking about homeless, when we are talking about children without parental care and others, so and keeping in mind this outsourcing reform, who would be against this? This kind of social groups, they cannot be mobilized and just express their dissatisfaction. So maybe this is one of those outcomes of neoliberalism. So it actually brings the not very nice outcomes for those who actually are the most vulnerable in society. So I'm so sorry for saying maybe not very saying obvious things, but these are my just general considerations as a reaction to your question. Thank you.
Yes, it's very interesting, and to hear about the idea of there's a general resistance to the policies, and it's the state has to play a double game in a way. They present themselves as they will keep a lot of the policies in place, they will keep the welfare system going, but on the other hand, they're dismantling it. Well, not very visible, in not very visible ways. So yeah, it is an interesting kind of picture. I believe I have a member of the audience ready to connect to ask a question, so I will attempt to do that now. Just give me a moment and we'll see if this works. The hand is up. Let's see if we have a question from the audience. Yes, we do. Anne-Marie, perfect. I'll ask you to unmute. You have to unmute, Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie is there with Leo.
Well, we are both in the same place. We are actually in Finland, just to tell you right now. Not so far from you, maybe, Anna. Leo wants to ask something. I think I will ask something a little later.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting, and I think very valuable now you are getting in this quite empirical and analysis with a lot of data. So I wonder what are the, how does this non-profit sector develop and how enterprises are developing this outsourcing system? It seems difficult to me for non-profit sector to really work there because they because they are often very small and organizations, and you need to work very long term to, for example, take care of elderly people for some institution. But maybe there is happening something in non-NGO sector that they are forming some large, like we have in Western countries, very large NGOs which are just working maybe like enterprises, but with a little bit different principles. So what is happening in Russia now?
Thanks a lot. It is a pleasure to see you, by the way.
The same.
Thanks a lot. This is really very important question. So first of all, non-profits are really they really find themselves in a difficult situation trying to enter this outsourcing scheme because of the reasons that you mentioned already, that they are small, their contribution is limited and maybe sometimes very specific. So they are present in this scheme, but in a very reduced way. I mean, there are not that many of them, first of all. Second, that I noticed concerning any tendencies, it seems that some private companies start to register additional non-profit companies, but working together. And this is crazy again, but this demonstrates this hybrid way of dealing with this outsourcing again. Because of course, with those people with whom I have been talking, they say, of course, we need to have this kind of non-profit organization as private companies, because we need to be closer to people. We need volunteers to be a part of this performance, of these services. We need either attract some more resources from volunteers, either demonstrate that we are not only searching for money. As private companies, we also are very human in this sense. So this is another tendency. But I actually couldn't find any examples of these bigger organizations that are more resourceful, involving a lot of volunteers, etc. It seems that they are indeed very small ones. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will offer another question in that case. Now, I was curious about what your view is on the reasons why the public sector is not able to cope from the point of view of those who are doing the reforms, and whether this is a question of state capacity, that the state is actually not capable of delivering a good enough quality of services. And if so, how is it becoming known that the quality is not good enough? And where is the feedback mechanism? And I'm curious, just within the context of the reforms, especially since 2012, whether you think there's any connection there, or maybe you could expand and answer on that.
Yes, thanks a lot. First of all, the scoping thing. So as elsewhere, in Russia, we see the rise of elderly aging. We see this aging of the population, right? So number of those homes, public homes for elderly, for example, it's not enough for those people who actually require this help. So the facilities themselves, I mean, the infrastructure is not enough. I mean, it doesn't fit all those who are in need of this kind of services. This is first of all. Probably partly, I don't know, maybe Anne-Marie would agree or not with me here, because of the fact that population is getting poor, those people who are who are in age when they require this care, they don't have any relatives, or they don't have any social networks in order to have this support. So there are more and more people who require this support from the government, not from family or other social networks. So this is one thing, that the situation is changing. Another thing is that this infrastructure of these public homes for children is actually deteriorating, and we see that not that many investments were made from the government to renovate, to, I don't know, invest money to make it more with requirements that are seen from the society, for example. So here we indeed see that these limited capacities of the state or regional authorities to actually manage this infrastructure. And as for the reactions, it is also a good question to see if we can see any reaction or well-mobilized reaction from those elderly, for example. It's not that, I don't know, not that social group that would be very active probably in society to push their interests and demonstrate the dissatisfaction, apart from voting, of course.
And of course, this year we saw the way that the government responded to COVID, and the raft of support measures that were offered principally aimed at some large child families, and also medical workers, and the budjetniki themselves were protected. But of course, the large part of the population was not protected financially or with extra welfare. For very quickly, there was quite I wonder if you would comment on the speed of the response and what the government was doing in this year in terms of responding to a crisis and actually looking after the population in the way that you would expect from you know, a country with a level of income as Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thanks a lot. So two things I would like to mention here. So first of all, we probably hear a lot of talk about the support for families with children that was provided by the government, but also there is this support for pensioners and those people who are actually who fall under this category of elderly people. But everybody, I mean, all experts actually say that it's not enough. What was delivered, what was actually proposed to those people who found themselves in this difficult situation, and not only in Russia, of course, elsewhere in other countries. So the government reacted indeed and tried to target different categories of people, but the reaction was indeed not very prompt reaction on one hand. On the other, it's not enough. This is at least calculations that are provided by experts. One more thing I would like to mention here is that, of course, there are some cases of corruption already was found in this kind of scheme of support that was introduced by the government in order to fight these consequences of the pandemic situation in Russia, unfortunately.
Yes. Now, I'm curious if there will be some more questions from the audience. I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
Okay.
I'm waiting for you. Yes. Oh, we have Anne-Marie. Excellent.
I will turn now to some of the other questions you mentioned in the abstract that you would deal with. For example, I'm thinking about the motive of the regions to try to engage NGOs, and connected to that, I would like to hear if you have examples of this cooperation that you mentioned. I have interviewed a few such former NGOs who became sort of part of the state, because good examples, then they would pick those who are doing well and make them sort of public. So it's more or less the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have one question about the money that Putin promised to the regions to deal with COVID. Do you know anything about that? Is it?
Mm-hmm. I can start with the second. Thanks a lot. I can start with the second question. I think I don't know much about this, unfortunately. But when it comes to this first questions concerning this non-profits and motivation, why actually regional authorities would be keen on trying to engage the non-profits and even involve them in outsourcing scheme. I think actually the key motivation is that central government makes them doing that. So the actually central government, if we are coming back actually to the, this first comment by Matthew about this neoliberalism, central government seems to be very interested in demonstrating that we are also actually modernizing our system of social policy. We don't have only our public sector to take care of different categories of people, but we also have, I don't know, private companies. Business is here as well. Look at that, how good we are. And non-profits as well are mobilized here. So this is the agenda of the central government, and it is indeed interesting to see how it is interpreted at the regional level. And it seems that the majority interpret it as a way of course, demonstrating that non-profits are there, but at the same time giving money or including in outsourcing scheme only those non-profits who are well known or in the best way are run by former public managers or those people who are connected somehow to the regional welfare system, public system, of course. So I think the motivation is this, though I actually heard from one person from Leningradskaya Oblast. She was representative of the Center for Social Care of Population, something like that. This is a public organization. She was saying something that, of course, we would invite non-profits and private companies because they are, you know, they are so good in delivering the high quality services, because public organizations are outdated already. I mean, they cannot provide services at a high level. They cannot they work with the old methodology and etc. So non-profits are seen as those organizations that actually bring innovation, bring new methods of care, and maybe some new ways of arranging this kind of social provision. So in some cases, this is exactly the motive, I think, of regional authorities. I also see, may I just add something? There is one concept that is called societal capture. It is when actually people from the government, from public sector, they come to non-profit and private sector and capture positions there. It is opposite to the cooptation. Cooptation is when actually people from non-profits and private companies, they are co-opted by the government, so they become a part of the public system, right? So what I see in Russia, it seems that it's more societal capture. So people from the state come and capture those non-profit positions and positions in private sector rather than another way around.
Okay, I'll just check to see if there's any more questions from the audience. I'm particularly interested in if we could go back to the first slide of the presentation, if that's possible, would you be willing to share that your screen and just?
Yes, sure.
I was very interested in the question of blame shifting.
Mm-hmm.
That
yes.
This is a big part of the picture. It's part of a thesis that, well, a larger thesis that the government is fighting a struggle for legitimization and to try and present itself as always a successful provider of services and providing stability, of course, is the big narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are mistakes, if there are failures, if there is corruption, this must be not part of the central government's fault, but it must be a regional mistake. It must be some other sector. So it's about shifting the blame out. I wonder if you could expand on that, and maybe just for the audience, kind of just talk about the different periods we're in, perhaps since 2012. A particular
mm-hmm.
phase of this, a new phase of this, if you agree with that idea, that
mm-hmm.
this blame shifting is becoming more important in some way on this level.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, thanks a lot. This is very, very important. Thanks. The thing the reason why I actually escaped talking much about this blame shifting is because I don't have much data to actually support any argument. So actually we really need to think of a good methodology to actually catch this blame shifting, generally in interviews, of course, because just these figures that are available now during pandemic is not enough. Of course, we need to go to and make some field work. But if I can speculate a little bit, it looks exactly in the direction of the way the Russian government is performing. So they really try to demonstrate that the president is under everything, right? So he is the perfect figure, and everybody else is just blamed for their mistakes, for miscalculations, and the absence of initiatives, etc. So if we actually go to this ladder down a little bit from the president, the federal level, to regional level, then municipal level. Now we have a new level, this private organizations, private companies, and also non-profits who can be blamed for any unpleasant outcomes. So I would support. I'm sorry that I don't have any data to actually support this. I think maybe something will come up later. But generally, I would say that we need more data, of course, to.
Yeah, it's an interesting direction to move in, certainly. I wonder if you have a view on the. There's often a lot of talk in the literature about the role of the state and the state being everywhere and the state micromanaging and interfering, co-opting, repressing, and the role of the state everywhere. I wonder if you have a view on this view of the role of the state, and then what does that do to innovation? Does it allow people to be innovative and take risks? Or do you think that the culture in non-profit organizations is leading more and more towards being careful, conservative, and always being on the right side of the patrons higher up in the state?
Thanks a lot. So it seems like that at first glance, that we can see that actually all these limitations that brought by the policy, for example, let's take this example of foreign agents law, for example, right? So, and other limitations, we definitely see that non-profits are not anymore motivated to be innovative, to be actually creative, to, I don't know, establish networks and, I don't know, demonstrate this kind of performance as we would expect them to make. But at the same time, I'm sure that analysts would also support me here, and maybe with some examples. I don't know how it happens, but it seems that individuality is there anyway, and people with very passionate way of doing something. I'm sorry that I'm taking this individual perspective now. So we have these institutions and this not very conducive environment. But at the same time, at the level of individual choices, there are some people who are actually going beyond these limitations. But of course, we cannot expect, and this is one of the outcomes, I think, that we cannot expect that everybody would be so, I don't know, much pushing these boundaries. Of course, people would tend to fit these limits, to actually be compliant with those requirements and pressure from the government, so they wouldn't be so innovative and maybe proactive. And this is the reason why we actually experience, and we can see not that many interesting initiatives, though we see a lot of initiatives in the political sphere now. I mean, people would rather go to the streets and express themselves there rather than actually being. Let me tell you something more, if you don't mind. Sorry that I'm the response is so long. I now just remembered that the analysis of a colleague of mine. She has been demonstrating that Svetlana Yerpeleva, actually her name, she demonstrated that actually people started to be proactive at the grassroots level in Russia with the idea that they are doing this against the central government, something like that. So this politicization is there, and people being innovative and doing something, they incorporate this political aspect of their activity.
Excellent. Now we have two more questions from the audience. I will begin with Helen Karlbach, if I can connect to you, and then I'll go to Anne-Marie after that. I'll just see if I can start the video, if that's okay. Helen, if you are okay to do that. Here we go. And I'll ask you to unmute. There we go.
Yes. Okay, you can see me and hear me?
All clear, yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Helene Karlbäck. I'm of Södertörn University in Stockholm. Thank you very much, Anna, for an interesting talk. And I'm not very knowledgeable in this field, but I take interest in this, and I really appreciate when we get also aspects of this kind of Russian reality or whatever. It's very interesting, social policies and so on. I have a question about the relations and maybe power relations between the government, the state, so to say, and in this case, maybe non-profit organization, could be also private organizations. Mm-hmm. And that is a little bit about the regulations about how to take care of social policy matters. The system of what would call maybe how to audit, overview the whole system of non-government organization. To what extent, if it's possible to say, this is predictable, or is it very unpredictable, or are there rules, regulations of this kind that you have taken into your research and maybe will be used or have used? Yeah, thank you for answering that.
Thank you. May I just have one clarification? By power relations between non-profit and private organizations and the state, what do you mean power relations?
Well, since I sense that back and forth when we're talking now at the seminar, it's a bit about if the state is really, I mean, especially when we talked about other kind of NGOs, which are now not allowed any longer. And if we have this underlying understanding of kind of a pressure from the state of getting rid of some organizations. And that is what I mean by power. I understand that there's also this tendency, of course, to invite non-profit organizations to take care of it. But anyhow, in this sense, is it, I mean, is it easy for the non-profit organizations, so to say, to get into this system, or can they do whatever they like or whatever, so to say? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I will start with this second part about these regulations and overview, because it seems that this is the central, one of the central aspects of these relations in outsourcing scheme as well. Because those organizations, non-profits and private companies, they all the time raise the issue of the excessive regulation from the point of the government. So they see that there are so many demands they need to meet in order to operate like official providers of services. So this is really one of the aspects of their relationships. I mean, the government would like to invite non-profits and private companies into this social provision and reimburse the costs of services that are delivered, but it also implies a lot of pressure from the, meaning a lot of requirements that these organizations have to meet in order to operate as official providers. So this is exactly the case. This is what is going on there. When it comes to power relations, it's maybe I'm repetitive again, saying that actually it seems that those organizations that are somehow related to public sector, the regional level, they would be more welcome than those independent organizations. Though we know that independent non-profit organizations, they really push boundaries. I mean, they're really very active and sometimes not in a very nice relations with the regional government, but they become a part of this system of outsourcing. So it seems that there are different modes of relationships between these non-profits, for example, and regional authorities.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'll now let Anne-Marie ask her question.
Well, actually, my question was a little related to Helene's question, because I was wondering a little bit, well, from the point of view that I met those who try to get on the right list of the so-called socially oriented NGOs to be allowed to provide the service and to get a contract with the state to do this. And it could also be that they have other activities that are not sort of dependent on money from the state. So it's not that they are working either full-time as a on contract with the state, but at least to a part. And my understanding is also a little bit that this is where there is a difference between a so-called democratic state and a more authoritarian state, because the government have to, they have to allow you to become socially oriented to get on this list. And it's for some of them, it could be very difficult, because maybe if they also have some little money from abroad for something, they might be put on this list of foreign agents instead. And this is a balance that I know some of these small organizations are working hard to avoid and try to, it's not really forbidden to get money from abroad, but you have to be able to show that it's not for a political cause, but purely for social or, well, some aspect that is not political. For example, disabled children or something, maybe that's sort of okay, but there are a lot of things on the border between political and social where you could find different ways to well, either that the state is very rigid, or the particular NGO will have problems to motivate exactly what they're doing. Or they just try to frame it in a way that doesn't sound political, although it is political. That's another thing. It's quite, well, I have at least met some of those. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very interested. I know it's difficult for you to give an answer to this one, Anna, but I know that you know a lot of researchers in the field, and maybe you have a view on participation in NGOs on the individual level, individuals who join NGOs often to do things, to change society, to help. Mm-hmm. Is there some kind of connection between those who end up in NGOs and then who end up in collective action in street? Is there some overlap? And I was just wondering, I guess that's what the Russian government is most afraid of with NGOs, that they will somehow spin out of control and generate new problems that they cannot anticipate. So, of course, this year we're seeing fresh protests in Khabarovsk. Last year we had protests in places like Arkhangelsk and in also in Moscow, of course, but also in Ekaterinburg, of course. So just to sort of summarize then, how much overlap is there between NGOs and people being in NGOs, and then of course these emerging kind of protests?
I'm sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot. This is also very nice turn of of the discussion. First of all, I think I need to mention that it seems that people, especially young people, tend to be informal. I mean, they tend to organize themselves informally without any structure. So this is actually a challenge for for the government and for researchers as well, in a way, that we need actually to catch this activity, I'm sorry, without looking at organizational level, right? So they actually organize themselves in social networks and then social media. They just don't need this kind of organizations. They, I mean, crowdfunding also something that helps to raise a lot of money, resources and funding in order to support this kind of activity. So this is indeed a challenge for the government. And even if we are talking about either we are talking about political activity or social activity, I think people tend to be less seen by the government. So less be seen as those targets of any policy from the government that is not pleasant. Yes, so I would comment like that.
Very interesting, and it's like a deadening effect, the touch of the state, and there's always new ways, always new evolving groups that they cannot co-opt, they cannot even get near. So very interesting. And if there are no more questions from the audience, I'm not sure if there's any more questions, but if there are no more, then I would just like to say thank you very much, Anna Tarasenko, for sharing her research, allowing us to engage with her today. And thank you also to our audience and to our guests for coming and for giving some questions and comments. And I will end our research seminar then at this moment.